Today, we will talk about a project which will be an e-commerce project. We will build the UI with the help of React with TypeScript. I have the backend already with me. There are some set of APIs. We will have a walkthrough of the APIs and then we will begin with the project. So I have a Postman collection of the APIs that we are going to use in our project. There are some folders you can see on the left of my screen. Here, I have divided the APIs of an e-commerce system typically into different modules. Now, an e-commerce is a very lengthy project. We cannot practically implement the whole project in just a couple of days, but the agenda is to understand an idea of how we will be using the APIs to integrate it with the React project. Now, for the APIs, I have divided it into different modules, starting from the user module. If I open user module, we have user related APIs. So the complete journey says a user will register to the site, then the user will log into the system, and then user will be able to access the API. A typical e-commerce system allows us certain things. For example, if a user comes on the website, the first step is the registration. Post registration, second a user does is a login. After login, the user browse the product, choose the product to purchase, or what I'll call it as add the product to cart. Then a user does a checkout, and at the place of checkout or the process of checkout says you have to place an order. This is a typical process that we will be following. Now, if we talk about some common e-commerce platforms like Flipkart, Amazon, and others, they do not mandate you to register or log in. You can also place a guest order, but we are not going to do the same. We are just asking the user to register and log in, and then we will be allowing the user to access the whole project. The idea behind doing this is we must understand how authentication works in the project. So once the user is logged in, then and only then the user will be able to access the other resources of the project. For now, we don't have a setup. So we will do a front-end project setup, and then we will begin with creating files, folders, and then setting up Redux, and so many other things that we already have a look at. Now, we were talking about the APIs. So user has a register and login API. Then it comes to product. So we have a product listing API, which will give us the list of the product. Then we have a cart API, which will add the item to the cart, which can read the card of the user. We also have coupon related APIs where you can see the list of coupons. And finally, we have a place order API. These are very minimal set. The APIs can grow very large in terms of numbers, but we are not going to implement all of them. Out of the ones listed here, we are going to implement only a few API. We will just ignore some other API like create product, because an e-commerce project that we are building is a user facing project. E-commerce also have an admin panel, a seller panel, and it's a very lengthy project. So for now, we are just targeting on the user facing panel. The user facing panel does not have an option to create a new product. Only a seller or an admin can do that. So for us, the get product list is the API that we are going to use. Second, cart, we will implement both add to cart, remove from the cart, update my cart, and so many different APIs. Then it comes to coupons. So we cannot create a coupon. Again, it goes to the seller or the admin's bucket, but we can see a list of the coupons and apply them whenever we want. We will apply the coupon at the time of placing an order. So along with the payment method, the coupon, and so many other things that we will take as an input, we will place an order. This is the journey that we are going to use forward. So let's begin with the setup of the project. I have an empty folder, and in it, I'm going to initialize a project using vite. The command to create a new project is npx create vite at latest, the same one. But the option that we are going to choose from the menu will be a different one this time. Let's have a look. So let it load. So I'll give a name of the project as e-commerce. Framework will of course be React, but this time I'm going to choose TypeScript, the first option. not the JavaScript. So let's choose TypeScript, and we have the project. It should appear here probably. Let's see. Better, I will open the folder here. So we have the project here. Now let's open the terminal and do the initialization. Now, since the project installation is done, let's install some of the packages that we will need at the time of development. So we know that for working with the project, we are going to create multiple pages. So we will have to install the router. So let me just install React router DOM, which is the router package. Then I also need the Redux to work with it. So I'm just going to install React Redux, the connector package, and redux.js/toolkit as the Redux core. All right, the package installation is now done. Now let's create some files and folder to start working with. Now in our project, we are creating very limited set of pages. So to begin with the list of pages, the first page that we must have according to our journey will be a login page where the user will log in. We can set the route to probably /login. Second, we can have a page called as a home page where we can see the list of the products on the home page. And the URL that we will keep for the home page could be a simple slash. This will be our home page. This will only be visible to the user once they are logged in. So we will learn the concept of protected routes as well here. Second, after logging in, we need the list of product that will of course appear on the home page. If the time permits, we will also create a product details page, which will have /product/product ID as the URL pattern. Then once the user views the product, the user will try to add them to the cart in order to purchase it. So we need another page called as a cart page. The URL must be /cart. Once the user goes to cart, verifies the product, then the user must go to the checkout, where the user fills in the address, select the mode of payment, etc., etc. So this would be must checkout. After checking out, the user must see an order confirmation screen. Once you place an order, you see that, hey, your order has been placed and will be delivered to you within so and so days. So that will be my order confirmation page. This will have a route something like order confirmation. These are the pages that we are going to create in our project. And I will just save it as a notes file here. So it will always have a summary. First thing first, I have to create multiple pages. So I need multiple folders. And we are going to follow the pages and the component structure where we will keep almost every route in the the pages folder and the reusable component inside the components folder. This is the correct way that we usually follow. Now, I'm going to create a folder in the SRC and we will name it as pages. And pages will have the individual file for each and every component. So we have a list of pages here. Let's create every page. Just the file for now. So I'm going to create login.tsx this time. Now we have created so many pages, and in order to connect them, we need something called as a router, which will create multiple URLs for multiple pages. So let's set up router first. We already have installed the router package. Let's verify if it has come here. Yeah, it's here. Now, let's work with router. To work with router, we have to start working at the topmost level. So app.jsx is the place where we usually set the router. Let's set it up. I'm gonna remove everything that's been written here. So let's remove this counter code. And let's set up the router here. To set up router, we need imports. And this time we are gonna use browser router. So I will import uh, from React router DOM, create browser router method, which helps us in creating the router. And let's create a router. Create browser router. This create browser router takes the argument in the form of array. So let's provide an array to it. And in the array, we provide multiple objects. The object takes two key value pair. First, the path, and second, the element. These are the two things that it takes. And we have the configuration for our router ready here. To attach this router to the app, we take the help of a router provider. So let's take a router provider here. Router provider is our component. We are going to use it here. And we pass router as a props. So I have passed router. And now my router is properly set up. So router will now help us in navigating two different URLs. So let's first validate by running the project whether we are seeing the correct UIs or not. Let's start the project. It must be started. Okay, so because the default app takes you to slash, so we land here on the home page. Now, the other one is slash login. So we do have a login page. We have a card page, a checkout page, and the order confirmation page. All right, so all of our pages are working properly fine. Now, let's start working on the other part of the setup. We do have the components ready. Now we need the page UIs to work with. So I have to create the UI, and for UI, I'm going to take the help of Tailwind CSS, which will make our work easy. So as I mentioned, we will use Tailwind CSS to work with the quicker UI, though our focus will not be on to creating a very sleek design this time. Most of the time we will be focusing on the functionality, the project setup, and the API integration with Redux. But we must need a very basic UI. So I'm going to create very smaller basic things here with the help of Tailwind. So to work with Tailwind, I have to install Tailwind also. That is the CSS library we need to work with. So let me install Tailwind. And how do we install Tailwind? Let's go to Tailwind's official website and see. Tailwind CSS with vite. And this is where we'll get the documentation. So it gives us a step-by-step process to work with it. We do have our project. Now we will install the Tailwind CSS. So let's copy the installation command. So I'm just gonna go to the terminal, open another instance maybe. Let me split it. And let's install its libraries. Okay, so Tailwind installation is done. Let's cross-check the same. We do have Tailwind here. Now, how to work with it? Let's have a look. So it says in your vite config ts file, we have to add these piece of code. Let's find out our file. So vite config ts is here, and it already has a code for the React plugin. We just have to add the Tailwind CSS on top of it. So I'll copy this import. We'll put it here. And then we'll use the Tailwind CSS in the plugins section. So we have the Tailwind coming up here. The next step is to import the CSS in our CSS file. So I'll do an import of Tailwind CSS in one of our CSS file. So we do have a CSS file that is main index.css and app.css, and we can use it anywhere. Let's go to app. And I don't want all of these older CSS parts. So let's remove everything up from here and import the Tailwind CSS. By importing the Tailwind CSS here, we will have the access to all the Tailwind classes. It is just similar to any other framework like Bootstrap. We just have to write the classes and the CSS will be applied with Tailwind. So Tailwind has its own CSS. Okay. Now what's next? So nothing next. It says to start your project. We already have our project with us. So now the default CSS got removed. And if you have noticed, the font got changed because the CSS is now removed and Tailwind will start taking the effect now. I'll just remove some extra CSS that is written in the index.css also. And everything gets reset now. Perfect. So I'll go back to my first screen, which is login page, and start writing the CSS or the UI part for my login page. So when I create a login page, I'll need the form to work with login. So I'll go all the way to my login page. Let's rename it to login page to a better naming convention. And yes, the import must be changed in our app file as we have renamed it. That's already done. Okay, fine. Now here I have to create a form for logging into the system. So let's create a login form now. We need only two fields to work with. That is the username field, where typically user enters their email, and a password field. Here we are skipping the registration part for now. We will directly jump onto login. I have a set of credentials which we can use to log into the system directly that our API understands. So here I'm just gonna create the UI. Let's remove this heading from here and let's leave a div and let's create a form here. So in the form, I will just create two fields as I mentioned. First will be email field, which will be of type input. Type I will set it to email. Let's set an ID as email to attach it with label, and we can mark it as required. We need this field as required. We are using the basic HTML validations this time. Now, there are extra things also which are required in terms of styling. We will do that, but first let's create the basic field one more. This time I need a password field. So let's import password. Same type and ID we are going to associate here. So we have it here, and what else? We need a submit button, I think. Password will also be required. And then I have to just submit. So submission will be done through a submit button. That button will say login. The type must be set to submit. So this will be our submit button. All right. Let's have a look at the UI, how our forms looks like. Now we have a form, we have our fields. The fields looks transparent. The button also does not have a styling yet because we haven't used the CSS classes. So I'll do one thing. I already have a setup of CSS and the UI code with me in order to save the time. So give me a moment. I'll open that file and I will just copy and paste that CSS specific part here so that our form looks good. The logic will remain same in it, but the form should look good. This is what I'm gonna do. So let me take a reference from the other field. And before I do that, let me show you what other logical part we are going to do. And later I will replace it with the UI. So here I need two things to manage. That is the email and the password. So I need two use state variables probably. I will take an email, set email will be a use state variable. And then I have a password and set password will also be an empty string. All right. We can also take an error. In case if any error occurs, we can also take a variable called as error and set error, which will also be of type use state. But here we have to understand TypeScript. What does it mean by using the TypeScript here? Let's now pay attention. At this point of time, I know that my email and password are going to be of type string. So I haven't mentioned anywhere the data type. When we use the use state hook, if we want to mention the type of the data, then we can put an angle bracket here and write the data type like string. This is called generics in TypeScript, where I am passing the data type to use state, and then use state will understand that the variable email is of type string. However, it is not mandatory to pass it in such cases where we are giving a default value. For example, in password also we have given an empty string. So TS has automatically inferred the type of password as a string. So we don't have to worry about when we are giving the data values as a default one. It will be read automatically. So here my password is of type string. I don't have to worry about it. But when it comes to error, what type of data will it be? I have no idea. Here, There is no error right now, so I can set it to null. Initially, there will be no data. But if I set it to null, let's see what is the data type. It says error is null. Now, think logically. If there is any error in future by submitting the form or any other validation error if we get, so the error must have a message. We call it as error message. That error message will be of type what? Anybody wants to have a guess? What will be the type? If I want to show an error message, what must be the data type? Okay, let's see. That's correct from Praveen, string or any. Now I'll ignore the any part. Of course, we will use it when required. So the data type to show the error message on screen, since it's a message, it should be of type string. And here I have set the type as null because initially there is no error. So I can't set any message. But TypeScript says you cannot change the data type. So it is not possible for me to set a string type data into a null type of variable because it will violate the rule of TypeScript. And that is why we use TypeScript to set the rules. So I have to manage it some way so that it can handle null if there is no error. And if there is any error in future, then the error must be of type string set into the same variable. So we have to define two types of data, or I will say two shapes of the data for it. Now, how do I say give the data type? That is by putting the angle brackets and passing the data type. So first I will say it is of null type, but it can also have a string type. So how will I give it a string type and null both? We will use the union operator, which says it can now contain either a null value or a string value. If I hover on it, now it says null and string both are allowed. If there is no error, by default we will set it to null. But if there is any error, we will now set it to string. This way we can manage these two things into one single data type, right? Now, if there is any error, we will show the error also. So let's show the error here before our submit button. But whenever there is an error, then and only then I will show it. Meaning, if there is any data in error, then I will conditionally show the error value here. Looks quite understanding. We will have a look at it. Initially, I don't see an error anywhere because there is no error. But if I manually set an error here, saying something went wrong, some kind of a message, then that message appears here. It is coming in the black color, but we will add the styling quickly. So this is what we have, and this is how we are going to manage it. I hope it is clear to everybody. Now, I will set it back to null because there is no error initially, and this is the first place where we have used TS in our project. Now, I have the error, I have the other fields, I have everything. What else can we use? Okay. Now I have to put the data here. Whenever somebody changes something, I need to capture that data. So when somebody types something, I will register an on change here. And in the on change, I will just pass a callback function. This is what we usually do, right? Either you pass a callback function here or you write a function above and call it. It's the same thing. But I have to set the value into email field. So I will write set email, and the value which user is typing will be captured using e.target.value. This is what I will update it into my email variable. Second, for password, I'm going to do the same thing. On change will have a callback function, and the data will be set into the password field. So we have the data captured. Is everybody okay till here? Does anybody has any questions? Yes, please ask. We have done a basic setup. We have seen how things are working here. Now, the next thing will be to submit the data into the API. But we need the Redux setup for that, so we will come to it in some time. And to submit the form, we will need an on submit handler, right? Let's call it as handle submit. And we can create our own function called as handle submit here. In it, we are gonna call the login API and set the data to Redux store. What data we will talk about it later, but we know that we have to set the data here, right? Now, if everybody is okay with this form, I will now replace it with the UI based form because it doesn't look good. It does not have a good UI here. So I have a Tailwind written form, the same form I have written already, and I will just replace its UI. Okay, so I have copied the form and I'm going to paste it here. If you see the UI created by this, it will look better because I'm using the CSS classes for Tailwind. These all are the Tailwind classes. So the properties are already written for the same. We don't have to worry about them. It will just show us the form ideally. Let me go back to the UI and see what it looks like now. Okay. So now the UI looks much better. The same set of fields, the same button, but the UI looks much better. Let's see how the error looks like in this UI. So if I set an error, the error will also look like in the red color. So quite easy, right? To see the error. Let's revert it back. So we have the UI, that's all. We still have to work with the logical part. Now, let's start things one by one. Here, in order to submit the form, the first thing that I have to use is we use something called as an event, and we use e.prevent default. Now it gives me an error for e because we are in TS. It says parameter e implicitly has any type, and we must not set it to any. Because e has an any type, while writing the prevent default, VS Code also didn't show us the suggestion. See, there is no suggestion for prevent default, right? So we must inform TypeScript what is the type. Now to associate any type with E, we must know that E is an event and React has its own events. We earlier discussed about them. They are called a synthetic event. Those events are available into the React package. So to associate a type, the type that E has is called as React.form event. This is the type, React.form event. Now I will write prevent default. And now I see the suggestions coming up in the VS Code. Because now TS knows the type of E and its available method. So I'm getting a suggestion, prevent default, and I will call it. So we have informed the function that E is of type form event of React and it has a method prevent default. So now we have prevented the default submission. Okay, now what's next thing is we have to call the login API. And to call the API, we need a package called as Axios. So we will install Axios to call the API. Let's install it. Okay, the installation is done. Now we will write Axios to call the API here. But our project is gonna be a larger one this time. We are gonna have so many API calls. So we have to think about a more crisp and clear way of how to call the APIs. That is something we have to understand in detail this time. To call the APIs, I can directly write axios.get, axios.post here and start calling the APIs. That is okay. I can do that. But I have to call the API at so many places in this project. For product, cart, checkout, place order, everything is an API. And if we see how the API is going to work, we will understand some common parameters. What are required or which are required for the, I would say, the configuration. There is some common set of configuration which will be followed by lots and lots of APIs. So for that, we have to write a generic and a common API call or a common place from where we will use the API calls. What do I mean by that is I will create another folder called as services in my project. And in the services folder, I will write the API calls. This will create a separate layer of the APIs. And in order to make debugging easier, we must create layers of everything. You will understand once we create and set it up. So I will create a new folder. We'll put the name as services here. And services will have multiple files for API calls only. I'm gonna use the login API. So let's create a file here and let me call it as auth. These are all authentication related things, login, signups. So I'm calling it as auth dot ts, not tsx. Remember, because I'm not gonna write the UI here. We are only writing the API calls. That's why we have it here. So here I will import Axios from Axios and I will create a simple function called as login user. All right. All the authentication related functions to call the API should be written in this file now. Login, logout, etc. etc. So I'll create this function and I will call the API here. So to call the API, we must wrap them into try catch. All the API calls must be wrapped inside the try catch. And in here, I'm just gonna call the API. So my API will be Axios dot post and the URL of the API. So what's the URL of the API? Let's have a look. So go to the login API and it says your base URL and /user/login. This is what we have. So for my system, I will have a base URL. My base URL is localhost 8080/API/v1. This is my base URL because this is where my project is running for the e-commerce backend. It's running in a separate instance. I will show it to you later, but I have a Node.js service running on this UI, this URL, and this is what we will use for all the API calls. So this is gonna be a common URL part. And after that, my API, which is user login. So this is my whole user login API. Now, this is a login API. So it is going to take two things. First, it is going to take email. And second, it is going to take password. Now here, we are inside TypeScript. And by default, parameter has type any. So we must not do this, and we explicitly should mention the type of email. That would be string, and the type of password will also be of type string. And this is the post API. So we have to pass the body in the post API. And Axios says in the second parameter, I can pass the body here. No, not like this. Directly I can pass the body. The second parameter itself is the body. And body will need two things, email and password. This is how we will call the API. Now API will give us a promise. So we will use async await. I'll have to make this function as async. And I have to wait for the response. So I'll write await and then the API call. And once we receive the data from API, then we will just put it into the console.log response.data, because data is where we get the data from the API. If there is any error, then what will we do? Simply, we will put a console.log saying error in login API, and let's print the error. And instead of log, let's use console.error so we will know this is an error. So we did this. Now, this login user must be used in the other file. So I have to export it. And I'm doing a named export here because we will keep adding multiple functions. Logout will also be a part of the same file. So here we will put everything as a named export. So is everybody fine with this API call that I have written here? Now let's have a look at the actual API call as to what parameter does it gives us when it gives a success response. First, we should test it in the Postman. So I'll go here, I'll go to body, and this is the correct username and password that my system accepts. So let's run this, and the base URL is set to localhost. And when I hit the login API, the connection is refused. I think my server is not running. Let me start these. And this is what happens, guys, when we log in. You see how a login API responds. When we call the login API, it gives us three keys in its success response. A success as a boolean, a message, just a simple login message, and something called as a token. Now this token is very important and we have to understand its importance. Let's copy this and put it into our code. I'll put here. Now this token is very important because this identifies a user. Whenever we learn about authentication and a user logs into any website, user always gets a token. This token which you see here is called as JWT or JSON Web Token. This token is used to be sent in all the APIs to the server to inform the server about the identity of the user. By looking at this token, server knows that a logged in user is calling the API. So we have to store this token and pass this token in all the further APIs. If we do not pass the token in the APIs, the API will not give us the response. It will simply throw the error. Let me show you by calling product list API. If I call a product list API without the token, it will give me an error called as unauthorized 401 status message because we have not passed the token yet. The token that we have received must be passed in the header of the API. How? Let's see. I will copy this token and Postman, I will go to headers, and there is a key called authorization. We have already learned about the headers and how to set the value in headers. So in the authorization header, we have to write bearer space the token. And if you send this token in the API, then you get the actual response. Otherwise, the API throws the error. If I do not pass it, I will not get the response from the API. These are called as protected APIs. So we will now have to store that token so that I can pass it everywhere in all the other APIs going forward. That will be our next step. And in the next session, we will see how to store the token, how to pass it in all the other APIs.